My parents destroyed my future to protect my sister, but they never expected what happened next. Give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more of these deep and passionate stories every night before bed. If someone had told me 2 years ago that the people who loved me most would become the greatest obstacle I'd ever face, I would have laughed. Parents are supposed to sacrifice for their children. Mine sacrificed me, not because I was a disappointment, because I was succeeding too much. And apparently, that was unforgivable. By the time I uncovered the truth, my dream college was already gone. My family had turned into strangers, and a decision made behind my back had started a chain reaction that would tear our entire family apart. But here's the part nobody expected. Not me, not my parents, not even my sister. When the truth finally reached my grandparents, everything changed. My name is Nathan Brooks. I was 18 years old when my life split into 2 separate versions. One where I believed my family wanted the best for me, and another where I realized they'd been quietly working against me for years. We lived outside a quiet town in western Pennsylvania, the kind of place where neighbors waved at each other every morning, everyone knew everyone else's business, and appearances mattered almost as much as reality, especially to my parents. My father, Greg, managed a regional insurance office. My mother, Melissa, taught 4th grade. To everyone else, they looked like the perfect couple. Respectable, responsible. The family everyone complimented. If people only knew what happened after the front door closed. My younger sister, Ava, was 16. Growing up, we might as well have lived in different worlds despite sharing the same roof. She loved attention. I loved books. She chased popularity. I chased goals. She could spend 6 hours perfecting an Instagram post. I'd spend 6 hours reading anatomy textbooks for fun. We weren't enemies. Not at first. We simply wanted different things. The difference was, whenever one of us failed, it somehow became everyone else's problem. And whenever I succeeded, it somehow became Ava's. School came naturally to me, not because I was some genius, because I genuinely loved learning. While other kids counted down until summer vacation, I'd spend weekends building science projects in our garage. I'd volunteer at the local hospital, read medical journals most teenagers couldn't pronounce, shadow physicians during school breaks. Every tiny step felt like another brick leading toward one dream, medical school. I wanted to become the kind of doctor families never forgot. The one who remembered names, who stayed 5 extra minutes after appointments. Who cared? That dream wasn't born overnight. It started when I was 11. My grandfather suffered a heart attack. The emergency physician who saved him stayed beside our family long after the crisis ended. Watching that doctor gave me purpose. From then on, there was never another career I'd considered. Everything I did revolved around that goal. Perfect grades, science competitions, volunteer work, leadership programs, research. Every sacrifice felt worth it because dreams require discipline. At least, that's what I believed. Ava viewed life differently. Homework was something to survive. School was secondary. Social media came first. Friends came second. Shopping came third. Everything else, eventually. Her grades slipped every semester. Teachers called home constantly. Assignments disappeared. Projects remained unfinished. Tests were failed. Each report card became another family crisis. Except, no one expected Ava to change. Instead, everyone expected the world around her to adjust. When sophomore year arrived, she nearly failed chemistry, then algebra, then biology. Her teachers insisted the issue wasn't intelligence. She simply refused to put in consistent effort. Most parents would have hired tutors, created study schedules, established consequences. Mine did something else. They convinced themselves something had to be medically wrong. Over 6 months, they dragged Ava to specialist after specialist, educational psychologists, behavioral therapists, learning disability experts. Every evaluation ended exactly the same. She's perfectly capable. She simply isn't applying herself. Those words infuriated my parents, not because they weren't true, because they didn't fit the story they wanted. Eventually, they stopped looking for answers. Instead, they started looking for someone to blame. And somehow, that person became me. The first warning arrived during my junior year, although I didn't recognize it then. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Harper, scheduled a college planning meeting. She'd been helping me prepare applications for months. When we sat down together, she smiled before I even opened my folder. "Nathan," she said, "students with your record don't just apply to excellent universities." She leaned forward. "They choose among them." My parents exchanged a glance, one so brief most people would have missed it. I didn't. Mrs. Harper continued, "You should seriously consider several elite pre-med programs." She started naming schools: Duke, Northwestern, Vanderbilt, Washington University, Johns Hopkins. Every name made me more excited. Every name made my parents quieter. Dad interrupted. "What about schools closer to home?" Mrs. Harper looked confused. "He certainly can attend locally," she answered. "But with these qualifications, limiting his applications wouldn't make much sense." Mom smiled politely, then steered the conversation toward Ava. "She's been struggling emotionally." Mrs. Harper nodded sympathetically. "But today's meeting is about Nathan." Silence. Looking back, that silence said everything. That night, my parents invited me into the living room. Whenever they called something a family conversation, it usually meant someone had already made a decision. Dad folded his hands. "We've been thinking. Never a good start," he sighed. "You know your sister hasn't been herself lately." I nodded. Mom added softly, "She's having a difficult time comparing herself to you." I frowned. "What does that have to do with college?" Another pause. Dad answered carefully. "If you attend some prestigious university across the country," he searched for the right words, "it may make Ava feel like she isn't enough." I blinked. Surely I'd misunderstood. "What?" Mom reached across the couch. "We're simply asking you to consider staying nearby. So Ava won't feel abandoned? So she won't constantly compare herself?" I stared, unsure whether to laugh. "You want me to choose a college based on her feelings? It isn't that simple." "It sounds exactly that simple." Dad's voice hardened. "Family makes sacrifices." I remember thinking the conversation was ridiculous, temporary, overprotective, nothing more. I assumed they'd eventually come around. I couldn't have been more wrong. There had always been examples, moments I'd ignored, tiny cracks that suddenly formed one enormous picture. When I was 13, I'd spent months building a robotic arm for the regional science fair. The night before judging, Ava accidentally knocked it off my workbench while filming a dance video. The project shattered. Motors, sensors, weeks of work, gone. She burst into tears. Not because she'd broken it, because she felt guilty. My parents hugged her, comforted her, ordered pizza, bought her a new designer jacket that weekend because she'd been having a hard time. Me? I rebuilt what I could overnight. Finished second. No apology ever came. Another time, Dad promised we'd visit a medical conference together. The morning we were leaving, Ava wanted to go shopping instead. Guess where we went? Guess where we didn't? Little moments, easy to dismiss individually, impossible to ignore once they formed a pattern. Senior year arrived, application season, the biggest months of my life. I poured everything into those applications. Every essay became personal. Every recommendation letter mattered. Every interview felt like a step closer to the future I'd imagined since childhood. I applied to 14 universities, excellent state schools, private universities, scholarship programs, and one dream, Johns Hopkins. Not because it was famous, because its research opportunities aligned perfectly with everything I'd spent years preparing for. Getting accepted wouldn't guarantee success, but it would open doors I'd dreamed about since middle school. The application demanded more than every other school combined: multiple essays, research summaries, leadership portfolios, volunteer documentation, faculty interviews. I loved every exhausting minute. For the first time, my future felt real. Mom even helped organize paperwork. Dad drove me to an alumni interview in Baltimore. They smiled, asked questions, encouraged me, or at least they pretended to. Looking back, their performance deserved awards. Acceptance season finally arrived. The first email appeared during February. Penn State. Accepted. Scholarship included. 3 days later, University of Pittsburgh, accepted, honors program. Then came Virginia, Ohio State, Michigan State. Each notification made my heart race. Each success felt like confirmation that years of work meant something. Friends celebrated. Teachers congratulated me. Mrs. Harper hugged me after school. You've earned every bit of this. Only one decision remained missing. Johns Hopkins. Weeks passed. Nothing. Other students began posting acceptance videos online. Classmates discussed interviews, scholarships, housing. Still, silence. Every morning, I refreshed my inbox before breakfast. Every night before bed, still under review. March ended. April began. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. Then, one afternoon, I made a phone call that changed everything. I dialed the admissions office, just hoping someone could explain the delay. Instead, a woman answered with words I'll never forget. "Mr. Brooks." She sounded confused. "Our records indicate you withdrew your application in January." My stomach dropped. "What?" She paused. "Didn't you submit the withdrawal request yourself?" The room suddenly felt too small. "I never withdrew anything." Silence. Then, "I'm going to place you on a brief hold." As the music played through my phone, a strange feeling settled into my chest. Not fear, not confusion. Something worse, the terrifying realization that someone had stolen something I hadn't even known was missing. And within minutes, I was about to discover exactly who. The email that stole my future. For several endless seconds, I sat frozen with my phone pressed against my ear. The cheerful hold music coming through the speaker sounded surreal, almost mocking. Around me, the world continued as if nothing had happened. Students crossed the parking lot outside my school. Cars rolled past. Someone laughed in the hallway. Meanwhile, my entire future had just been rewritten with a single sentence. "Our records indicate you withdrew your application?" No, that wasn't possible. There had to be a mistake. Finally, the admissions representative returned. "Mr. Brooks?" "Yes, I've reviewed your file." Her voice had changed. Now she sounded concerned. "It appears we received a withdrawal request on January 18th. She paused. "It came from the email address listed on your application." My heart pounded harder. "Can you send me a copy?" "Of course. I'll forward it immediately." I thanked her mechanically before hanging up. Then I sat there staring at my phone. 10 seconds later, the email arrived. I opened it, and every ounce of blood drained from my face. The message looked perfect. Too perfect. Subject: Application withdrawal request. The email politely thanked Johns Hopkins for considering my application. It explained that after discussing things with my family, I decided to stay closer to home. It wished the admissions committee well. It even referenced my application ID, my address, my phone number. Every detail was correct. Even the signature looked like mine, except I had never written a single word of it. I checked the timestamp, 2:13 a.m., January 18th, a Thursday. I knew exactly where I had been, asleep. I never stayed up that late during the school week, never. I read the email again, then again, each time hoping I'd suddenly remember sending it. Instead, the opposite happened. The more I looked at it, the more obvious it became. Someone had carefully written it to sound exactly like me. Someone who knew what I'd say, how I'd write, what information to include. Someone who had access to everything. My application, my personal email, my private information. My stomach twisted. There weren't many people who could have done that, and every possible answer terrified me. The first person I suspected was Ava. She'd always hated being compared to me. She'd made little comments over the years. Not everyone wants to spend their life buried in books. Some people actually have friends. You're not better than everybody. I usually ignored them. Sibling rivalry. Nothing unusual. But then I remembered something. Last spring, during finals week, my chemistry notes had mysteriously disappeared from my laptop. Hours of work. Gone. Ava claimed she'd accidentally deleted them while trying to print something. Mom believed her immediately. Dad told me to stop making accusations. I'd stayed up all night recreating everything from memory. At the time, I'd let it go. Now, that memory felt different, much darker. The moment school ended, I drove home. I didn't tell my parents, didn't text, didn't call. I walked straight upstairs. Ava was sprawled across her bed, scrolling through social media. She barely looked up. "What's up?" Without saying a word, I handed her my phone. She frowned. "Read the email." Read it again, then looked back at me. "What is this? You tell me. I've never seen this." "Someone withdrew my Hopkins application." "So? So it came from my email." She blinked, then frowned harder. "Okay?" I stepped closer. "You had access." Her expression changed instantly. Shock, then anger, then outrage. "You seriously think I did this? Who else?" She jumped off the bed. "If I wanted to ruin your applications," she jabbed a finger into my chest, "I would have withdrawn every single one." The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because they made sense, because she said them without hesitation, as if she'd already imagined doing exactly that. "You think you're some kind of genius," she snapped. "Everything has to be about you. I'm asking one question." "No, you're accusing me. I didn't touch your stupid application." She threw my phone back at me. It bounced off my chest. "You don't deserve Hopkins anyway." Silence. The sentence echoed through my head. "You've always acted like you're better than everyone. I worked for it." "Oh, please. You think grades make you special?" "No, they make me qualified. They make you arrogant." I felt something inside me crack. Years of swallowed frustration suddenly exploded. "Maybe people compare us because I actually finish what I start." Her eyes widened. "What did you say? You heard me? You think I'm lazy? I think you've never had consequences." She shoved me hard. I shoved back. She grabbed my sleeve. I pulled away. The next thing I knew, we were both yelling. Books crashed onto the floor. A lamp tipped over. Then, "Natan!" Dad's voice thundered through the hallway. Seconds later, both parents burst into the room. Dad grabbed my shoulders. Mom rushed toward Ava. "What happened?" Ava was crying now. A tiny scratch marked her cheek where she'd stumbled against the dresser. Mom immediately wrapped her in a hug. Dad glared at me. "What is wrong with you?" I held up my phone. "My Hopkins application." "What about it?" "Someone withdrew it." Both of them froze, only for a fraction of a second. But I saw it. I saw the glance, the one they thought I wouldn't notice. I explained everything. The phone call, the email, the fake withdrawal. When I finished, silence filled the room. Dad wasn't looking at me anymore. He stared at the carpet. Mom looked pale, almost sick. Then something happened I'd never expected. She started crying, real crying, not theatrical, not angry, broken. She sat down on Ava's bed and buried her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "again and again and again." My heartbeat slowed. "No, no." Dad closed his eyes, then exhaled. "We did it." The words barely sounded real. For a second, I honestly wondered if I'd imagined hearing them. "What?" Mom couldn't even look at me. "We sent the email." Every sound disappeared. I could hear my own pulse. Nothing else. Dad continued quietly. "You'd left your email signed in on my laptop months ago. We still had access." Mom whispered. "We thought." Her voice broke. It was the right thing. I stared at them, waiting, hoping there was more. Some explanation that would somehow make this nightmare understandable. Instead, Dad gave me one that shattered whatever trust I still had. "Ava wasn't handling your success well," I laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain refused to process what I'd just heard. "What?" Mom finally looked up. She was falling apart. "She compared herself to you every day. We were afraid," Dad continued, "that if you got into Johns Hopkins," he swallowed, "she'd completely lose her confidence." I waited. Surely there was another sentence coming. There wasn't. That was it. That was their reason. They had stolen my dream to protect my sister's self-esteem. "You destroyed my future." My voice barely came out. Dad shook his head immediately. "No, you got into excellent schools. You'll still become a doctor. You'll be fine. You'll be fine." Those 3 words echoed louder than anything else. Months, years, thousands of hours, research projects, volunteer work, late night studying, competitions, interviews, essays, sacrifice, reduced to, "You'll be fine." Mom reached toward me. We thought staying closer to home would be better. For who? Silence. For her? More silence. For you? Still nothing. Finally, Dad answered. For the family. I looked around the room. At my sister, who couldn't even meet my eyes. At my mother, still crying. At my father, who genuinely believed he'd done the responsible thing. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. They weren't sorry because they had done it. They were sorry because they'd been caught. Without another word, I turned around, walked into my bedroom, and pulled my duffel bag out from under the bed. Mom followed me. Nathan, I ignored her. I opened my closet, started folding clothes. Dad appeared in the doorway. What are you doing? Still, no answer. Mom's voice trembled. You don't have to leave. I zipped another compartment. Dad stepped closer. Be reasonable. I laughed softly. Reasonable. That word again. They had secretly sabotaged my future, forged my identity, lied to me for months. And now, they wanted me to be reasonable. I grabbed my laptop. Passport. Documents. Scholarship folders. Every important paper I owned. Dad watched silently, then said the one thing that removed every remaining doubt from my mind. You'll understand someday. I stopped packing. Turned slowly. No. I looked directly into his eyes. I won't. Then I picked up my phone, scrolled to one contact, and made the call that would change everything. Because there was only one person left in my family I still trusted, my uncle. And before sunrise, my parents would discover that the biggest mistake they'd made wasn't stealing my future. It was believing they could keep the truth hidden. I walked away from my parents. Then my grandparents changed everything. My uncle answered before the second ring. Nathan? His voice was calm, but he immediately knew something was wrong. Can I stay with you? There was only a brief pause. Then he said 4 words I'll never forget. Come here, right now. He didn't ask why, didn't ask how long, didn't hesitate. That told me everything. Some part of him had already suspected something wasn't right inside our house. I swallowed hard. I'll explain when I get there. We'll be waiting. The call ended. For a moment, I simply stood there holding my phone. The room I'd grown up in suddenly felt unfamiliar. The trophies on my bookshelf, the framed certificates hanging on the wall, the desk where I'd spent thousands of hours studying. It all felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Not mine. Not anymore. Behind me, my parents were still talking, trying to justify what they'd done. You'll understand someday. We were protecting the family. It wasn't personal. Every sentence somehow made everything worse because none of them sounded remorseful. They sounded convinced, as if they genuinely believed they'd made the correct decision. That terrified me more than the betrayal itself. People who know they're wrong can change. People who believe they're right rarely do. I zipped my duffel bag, picked it up, walked toward the front door. Dad blocked my path. Where are you going? Away. For how long? I don't know. You can't just leave. I looked directly at him. You already decided I wasn't allowed to choose my future. So now I'm choosing where I live. He reached toward my shoulder. I stepped backward. Don't. His hand froze in midair. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of letting my own father touch me. Not because he'd hurt me physically, because I no longer trusted anything he represented. Mom burst into tears again. Nathan, please. We were trying to help. I stared at her. Help who? She couldn't answer. Dad tried instead. Everyone. No. I shook my head slowly. You were helping Ava. Silence. And you convinced yourself sacrificing me was acceptable. Mom covered her face. Dad looked away. Neither denied it. That silence became their confession. I called a rideshare. The longest 7-minute wait of my life began. No one spoke. Ava stood halfway down the stairs. She hadn't moved since everything unraveled. She looked frightened. Not guilty. Not angry. Just lost. For the first time all evening, she finally spoke. "Nathan." I looked up. She opened her mouth again, then closed it. Whatever she wanted to say never came. The car pulled into the driveway. Its headlights washed across the front porch. I picked up my bag, walked outside, didn't look back. The ride to my uncle's house took just under an hour. I don't remember much of it. Streetlights blurred together. Rain tapped softly against the windows. My phone buzzed constantly. Mom, Dad, Mom again, Dad again. Voicemail after voicemail, text after text. I ignored every one. For the first time in 18 years, I chose silence. Uncle Ryan opened the front door before I even knocked. He pulled me into a hug so quickly I almost dropped my bag. "You look exhausted." "I am." Behind him stood Aunt Lauren. She'd already made up the guest room. Fresh sheets, clean towels, a plate of sandwiches on the kitchen counter. No questions, no pressure, just kindness. I hadn't realized how desperately I needed that. We sat around the kitchen table. For nearly 2 hours, I told them everything, every detail, the applications, the fake email, the confession, the justification. Neither interrupted, neither defended my parents, neither tried explaining their behavior. When I finally finished, Uncle Ryan leaned back, quiet. Then he said something unexpected. I had a feeling. "What?" he sighed. "They've always treated your accomplishments like they were inconveniences." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He gave a sad smile. "You were too young to notice." Then he started listing memories I'd completely forgotten. When I won the state science competition at 14, Dad skipped the awards ceremony because Ava had a volleyball game. When I'd been selected for a summer biomedical camp, Mom convinced me not to attend because Ava didn't want to spend 2 weeks without her brother. When I'd earned a scholarship to a leadership conference, my parents declined it without even telling me. They claimed the dates conflicted with a family vacation, except there had never been a vacation. Uncle Ryan remembered all of it because he'd argued with them every single time. "You were always expected to shrink yourself, so nobody else felt small." Those words hit me like a punch. I'd spent years believing those disappointments were random. Now I realized they'd never been random. There was a pattern, a deliberate one I'd been too close to see. The next morning, I woke up to voices downstairs. Several voices, more than I expected. When I reached the kitchen, I froze. Both sets of grandparents were sitting around the dining table. Grandpa Thomas, Grandma Evelyn, Grandpa Jack, Grandma Rose, every single one of them. No one smiled. The atmosphere felt heavy, almost like an intervention. Grandpa Thomas stood first. "Come sit down," I obeyed. No one spoke for nearly 30 seconds. Finally, Grandma Evelyn reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "We know." Those 2 words almost broke me. "You do," she nodded. "Ryan called us last night." Grandpa Jack's jaw tightened. "We wanted to hear it directly from you. So I told the story again, this time slower." The room stayed silent. No interruptions, no disbelief, no excuses. When I finished, Grandma Rose quietly wiped away tears. Grandpa Thomas stared out the window. Then, very calmly, he said, "I've never been more disappointed in my son. No one defended my parents, not once. Instead, questions began. Do you still have the email? Yes. Can we see it? I handed over my phone. Grandpa Jack read every word twice, then handed it to Grandma Rose, who read it 3 times. Finally, Grandpa Thomas closed his eyes. They forged your identity. Yes. They deliberately interfered with your college admissions. Yes. They lied to you for months. Yes. Silence. Then Grandpa Thomas stood. I'm calling my attorney. The room looked up. He wasn't joking. They need to understand actions have consequences. Over the next 2 hours, something happened that would permanently reshape our family. The 4 grandparents discussed finances, inheritance, education, future plans. Not once did they ask my opinion, because to them, this wasn't a debate. It was damage control. Finally, Grandma Evelyn turned toward me. We've made a decision, I blinked. What decision? Your education. She smiled softly. You'll never need financial help from your parents again. I opened my mouth. She raised a hand. Let me finish, Grandpa Jack continued. We've all been saving for years. Originally, that money was intended to help both families. He looked down for a second. Not anymore, I stared. What do you mean? Grandpa Thomas answered. We're paying for everything. College, housing, medical school, books. If you earn your acceptance, we'll make sure nothing stands in your way. My throat tightened. I can't ask you to. You didn't. Grandma Rose smiled. We're offering. Then came the second announcement, the one none of us expected. Grandpa Jack folded his hands. We're updating our wills, I frowned. What? He nodded. Your parents have demonstrated terrible judgment. They've shown they're willing to sacrifice the next generation for appearances. Grandpa Thomas finished the sentence. We won't reward that. The room became perfectly still. Most of our estates, he continued, will now skip your parents entirely. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No, I whispered. You don't have to. We do. Grandma Evelyn's voice was firmer than I'd ever heard. Family is built on trust. They broke it. The meeting ended shortly afterward. Everyone hugged me before leaving. Each embrace felt different, not out of pity, out of certainty. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. I felt protected. I thought maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was finally over. I couldn't have been more wrong, because later that evening, my phone rang. Again, and again, and again. 15 missed calls, all from my parents. Finally, against my better judgment, I answered. The moment I said hello, my mother's voice exploded through the speaker, and what she demanded next proved they still hadn't understood the damage they'd done. My parents tried to blame me. Then the family turned against them. The 16th call came just after sunset. For almost 3 hours, I'd ignored every vibration, every voicemail, every desperate notification lighting up my screen. I should have blocked their numbers immediately. Instead, some stubborn part of me wanted to believe they'd finally realized what they'd done. Maybe they were calling to apologize. Maybe they wanted to accept responsibility. Maybe I still wasn't ready to admit I no longer knew my own parents. I answered. Hello. I barely finished the word before my mother's voice crashed through the speaker. Nathan, what have you done? Not, are you okay? Not, can we talk? Not, I'm sorry. Her first concern wasn't losing her son. It was losing control. You told your grandparents everything. I closed my eyes. So that's why you're calling, because now they're furious. She sounded genuinely offended. They're refusing to answer our calls. My father took the phone. His voice was colder. You've embarrassed this family. I actually laughed, a short, humorless laugh. I embarrassed the family? You exaggerated everything. I told them exactly what happened. You didn't have to involve them. I didn't. They asked. Silence. Then Dad lowered his voice. You need to fix this. I almost thought I'd misheard him. What? You need to call them. Tell them you misunderstood. My heart started pounding again. You want me to lie? For the family? There it was again, that phrase. The same excuse they'd hidden behind every bad decision they'd ever made. Mom returned to the phone. You don't understand what you've caused. Our inheritance. She stopped herself. Too late. I'd heard it. Inheritance. Not once had they mentioned my dreams. Not once had they mentioned my future. Now they were worried about money. The truth settled over me like cold rain. This wasn't about guilt. This was about consequences. They weren't mourning what they'd stolen from me. They were panicking over what they'd lost themselves. Dad cleared his throat. Your grandparents are threatening to change their wills. I know. You know? They told me. Another silence. Longer this time. Then his voice changed completely. Nathan. He suddenly sounded calm. Reasonable. Manipulative. You know your sister is devastated. I didn't answer. She's blaming herself. Still nothing. She's barely eating. I stared out the kitchen window at Uncle Ryan's backyard. The sun was disappearing behind the trees. I didn't make that happen. You left. No, I spoke slowly. You forged my identity. You stole my future. You lied for months, I reacted. You caused this. No, you did. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Dad sighed. You've always been dramatic. That sentence hurt more than I expected. Years of effort, sacrifice, betrayal, reduced to one word, dramatic. I realized then nothing I could ever say would reach them, because accepting the truth would require admitting they had failed as parents. Their pride wouldn't allow it. I have one question. Dad sounded hopeful. Go ahead. If the situation were reversed, if Ava had earned something she'd worked toward for years, would you have secretly destroyed it to protect me? Silence. Absolute silence. He never answered, because he couldn't. The answer was obvious. No, never. Not in a million years. I smiled. It surprised even me. Not because I was happy, because for the first time, everything became perfectly clear. I hope Ava takes good care of you someday. What? When you're older, when you need help, when life gets difficult. Another pause. You should call her. I won't be available, Mom gasped. Nathan, you made your choice. Now make mine. I hung up. Then, without hesitation, blocked both numbers. One tap. 18 years. Gone. I expected relief. Instead, I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, sitting alone on the back porch while the evening air grew colder. Because despite everything, I still wanted parents. The people who raised me were still alive. But somehow, I'd become an orphan anyway. The following morning, the story exploded across our extended family. Not because I spread it, because my grandparents did. Every aunt, every uncle, every cousin, everyone received the same explanation. Not rumors, evidence. Copies of the withdrawal email, screenshots, dates, timelines, facts. Within 48 hours, the entire family knew exactly what had happened, and the reactions were immediate. Some relatives called me directly. My cousin Mason was first. Dude, I had no idea. Neither did I. I can't believe Uncle Greg actually did that. Then Aunt Denise. I'm so sorry. Then Grandma Rose's sister. Then old family friends. Phone after phone. Message after message. Almost every conversation ended the same way. We're proud of you. We're here if you need us. I can't believe your parents. For the first time, people were seeing what had really happened behind closed doors. But not everyone. Every family has people who refuse to believe uncomfortable truths. Mine was no exception. My mother's younger sister, Aunt Karen, called 2 days later. She didn't waste time. I think you're overreacting. I almost laughed. Really? They're still your parents. They made one mistake. One? They were trying to protect Ava. So destroying my future was acceptable? You're exaggerating. They only withdrew one application. Only one. As if dreams could be counted like grocery items. As if one opportunity didn't matter because others existed. I thanked her politely, then ended the conversation. Some people don't want justice. They want peace, even if peace requires sacrificing someone else. Meanwhile, my parents started telling their own version of events. According to them, I'd been rejected, couldn't handle disappointment, ran away from home, invented a story to avoid embarrassment. For a few days, some relatives believed it. After all, my parents had spent decades building spotless reputations. Who would suspect the respectable banker and elementary school teacher? Except they forgot one problem: evidence. The forged email existed. Johns Hopkins had confirmed it. Their explanation collapsed almost immediately. Every lie they told created another contradiction, and every contradiction pushed more relatives away. About 3 weeks later, my cousin Ethan called unexpectedly. You need to know something. What happened? I was at your parents' house yesterday. My stomach tightened. They're blaming you for everything. Figures. No. His voice lowered. It's worse. They're saying you manipulated the grandparents into rewriting their wills. I laughed. Actually laughed. The accusation was so absurd it almost became funny. They think I planned this? Apparently. They're telling everyone you wanted the inheritance. Inheritance. Again. Money. Again. They still couldn't understand. This had never been about money. It had always been about trust. Then Ethan told me something that stopped me cold. Nathan, what? Ava defended you, I blinked. What? I heard the whole argument, he explained. Apparently, my parents had spent nearly an hour complaining about me, calling me selfish, ungrateful, vindictive. Then Ava suddenly interrupted. She told them, "This isn't Nathan's fault." The room went silent. She continued, "You withdrew his application. You lied. You started all of this." According to Ethan, Dad slammed his hand on the table. Mom burst into tears. Neither denied what she'd said. Instead, they blamed her too. They told Ava she should have appreciated everything they'd sacrificed for her, that she should have been grateful, that she owed them loyalty. Ethan sighed. "I've never seen your sister look so broken." That night, for the first time, I thought about Ava differently. Had she been jealous? Yes. Had she said cruel things? Absolutely. But she hadn't forged my identity. She hadn't written that email. She hadn't made the final decision. She'd grown up in the same house I had, just under a different kind of pressure. A dangerous thought crept into my mind. What if she'd been manipulated too? I pushed it away. I wasn't ready to answer that question. Life slowly began settling into a new rhythm. I transferred to a different high school to finish my senior year. The transition was surprisingly smooth. Nobody knew my history. Nobody whispered. Nobody compared me to anyone. For the first time in years, I simply got to be Nathan. Not the successful brother. Not the family disappointment. Just myself. My new guidance counselor reviewed my transcripts, then looked up with a smile. "You've got an incredible future ahead of you." The words almost made me tear up because they were spoken without conditions, without guilt, without asking me to become smaller. A few weeks later, Case Western officially confirmed my admission. Not only was I accepted, I'd been invited into their competitive pre-med mentoring program, research opportunities, faculty mentorship, priority advising. It wasn't Johns Hopkins, but it was real. It was mine. No one could take it away. At least, that's what I believed. Because just when I thought the worst was over, a phone call arrived from Baltimore. And the woman on the other end was about to reveal something that made my parents' betrayal even darker than I'd ever imagined. The truth was even worse than I imagined. By the beginning of summer, I had finally started sleeping through the night again. Not every night, but enough to believe my life was beginning to move forward. My new school had welcomed me. Case Western had finalized my admission. My grandparents had insisted on taking me shopping for my dorm room months in advance. Uncle Ryan joked that Grandma Evelyn was treating college move-in day like a royal wedding. For the first time in what felt like forever, people celebrated my future instead of trying to shrink it. I thought the nightmare was behind me. Then my phone rang. The caller ID simply read, Baltimore, Maryland. For a second, I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered. "Hello, may I speak with Nathan Brooks?" "This is Nathan." "Hi, Nathan. My name is Rebecca Collins. I'm with the Johns Hopkins Office of Undergraduate Admissions." My heartbeat immediately doubled. "Yes? I know this may seem unexpected." "It is." She laughed politely. "I imagine so." Then her voice became serious. "We've recently completed an internal review involving your application." I frowned. "What kind of review?" "A quality assurance review." Silence. Then she continued, "There were several irregularities surrounding your withdrawal." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Rebecca explained that another admissions officer had noticed something unusual while auditing withdrawn applications. Apparently, very few applicants voluntarily withdrew after completing every interview and submitting every supplemental document, especially students with strong academic profiles. Even fewer cited vague family reasons. Someone had decided to look closer. When they compared my application history, they noticed inconsistencies. The withdrawal email had come from my account, but the IP address didn't match previous logins. Certain writing patterns were also different. Small details, nothing obvious, but enough to trigger questions. "So," Rebecca continued, We wanted to verify the withdrawal directly? I swallowed. I never withdrew. We understand that now. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said something I never expected to hear. Nathan, I want you to know something. Our admissions committee was extremely interested in your application. I closed my eyes. She kept talking. You were still under active consideration. You had advanced farther than most applicants. Every word felt heavier than the last. Not because I regretted losing Hopkins, because now I knew it hadn't been hopeless. I hadn't imagined my chances. My dream had actually been alive. Until someone murdered it. Rebecca sighed. We occasionally encounter situations involving controlling family members. That sentence shocked me. This happens? Not often, but often enough that we have procedures. She paused. I'm very sorry. There was genuine compassion in her voice. No pity, no empty sympathy, just honesty. If you'd like, she continued, the committee would be willing to review your application for next year's entering class. For a moment, the offer tempted me. It was everything I dreamed about, a second chance, a reset, a different ending. But after everything that had happened, something inside me had changed. I smiled sadly. I've committed to Case Western. I know. Rebecca sounded almost proud. They're lucky to have you, I laughed softly. Thank you. And Nathan? Yes? I'm sorry someone took that choice away from you. When the call ended, I sat in silence, not crying, not angry, just validated. For months, I'd wondered whether I simply wasn't good enough. Now I finally knew the truth. I never lost my opportunity. It had been stolen. That realization brought peace, but peace didn't last long. Because only a week later, someone from my old life reached out. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered, Nathan? The voice was barely above a whisper. I recognized it instantly. Ava? She started crying. Not dramatically, quietly, like someone who'd been holding everything inside for months. I need to see you. I don't think that's a good idea. Please, I just need 30 minutes. I have to tell you something. I can't do this over the phone. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed no. Then she said something that froze me. It's about mom and dad. They're still doing it. What? They're still trying to control your life. Silence. I'll explain everything. A week later, we met halfway between our towns, at a small coffee shop just off the interstate, the kind of place nobody would accidentally visit. I arrived early. She walked in 10 minutes later. For a moment, I barely recognized her. She'd lost weight. The confidence she'd always carried was gone. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. She looked exhausted, older somehow. Not physically, emotionally. She sat down without ordering anything. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she looked at me. I'm sorry. I nodded. I know. No. She shook her head. You don't. She reached into her backpack, pulled out a thick envelope, and slid it across the table. What's this? Proof. I opened it. Inside were printed emails, text messages, screenshots, dozens of them, some between her and mom, some between her and dad. Others made my blood run cold because they involved me. One message from my father read, keep checking his email. Another, did he mention any other schools? Another, find out who he's talking to. Then another, take pictures if you need to. I looked up slowly. What is this? Ava couldn't meet my eyes. I helped them. The words barely escaped her mouth. She covered her face. I helped them spy on you. Everything around us disappeared. The conversations, the coffee machines, the music. I heard nothing except my own heartbeat. She explained everything. It hadn't started with Hopkins, not even close. Nearly 2 years earlier, our parents had begun asking innocent questions. What colleges is Nathan interested in? Who does he email? What scholarships has he mentioned? At first, she answered without thinking. Their mom and dad. I assumed they were helping. Then the questions became stranger. What passwords does he use? Did you see any acceptance letters? Is Hopkins still his first choice? Every answer she gave allowed them to plan another move. They told me, she whispered, that your success was hurting our family. They said people compared us. They said I'd never recover if you left for some elite university. I stared at her. You believed them? She nodded slowly. I wanted mom and dad to be proud of me. That sentence shattered something inside me because it sounded painfully familiar. I'd spent years trying to earn their approval too. We'd just been manipulated differently. Then came the worst confession. I knew Hopkins was your dream, I swallowed. I told them. She started sobbing again. I told them everything. Your essays, the interview, the research project, the deadlines. She stopped speaking. What? I helped them write the withdrawal email. I felt physically sick. They asked me how you'd phrase things, what words you'd use. They wanted it to sound like you. She broke down completely. I thought they just wanted to delay your decision. I never believed they'd actually destroy your application. She looked at me through tears. I'm so sorry. I wanted to be furious. Another part, saw the terrified 17-year-old sitting across from me, a girl who'd spent years being emotionally molded by the same parents who'd controlled me. She wasn't innocent, but she wasn't the mastermind either. She'd become another tool, used, manipulated, then discarded. What changed? I finally asked. She wiped her eyes. You left. What do you mean? The house. Her voice cracked. Didn't get better. It got worse. She laughed bitterly. I always thought you were the problem. She shook her head. You weren't. Without me there, our parents needed someone else to control. That someone had become her. They monitor my phone now. They read my messages. They demand passwords. They ask where I go. She looked away, tracked my location. A chill ran down my spine. They're doing to you. She nodded. What they did to you. Then she leaned forward. There's something else. My stomach dropped. They've been asking relatives about you. I frowned. So? They're collecting information. About what? Your grades, your professors, your research. I felt my chest tighten. They said, Ava whispered, they won't let medical school take you away too. Every muscle in my body went rigid. What? They're already talking about interfering again. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I slowly reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, opened every important account, email, bank, university portal, scholarship websites, one by one. I began changing every password, every recovery email, every security question, every authentication setting. Ava watched silently. When I finished, she whispered, I should have warned you sooner. I looked at her for a long moment, then quietly replied, I'm glad you finally did. She nodded. But this isn't over, I frowned. What do you mean? She pushed one final envelope toward me. I found something in Dad's office. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten page. At the top, in my father's handwriting, were 6 words that made my blood turn to ice. Medical school contingency plan. And suddenly, I realized my parents had never stopped trying to control my future. They had only been waiting for their next opportunity. The last secret destroyed my family forever. I stared at the handwritten page in silence. For several seconds, I couldn't even bring myself to touch it. It wasn't a legal document. It wasn't a contract. It was worse. Because every sentence had been written by hand, my father's handwriting. Neat, organized, methodical. The title stretched across the top of the page, Medical School Contingency Plan. Those 4 words didn't belong together. Parents weren't supposed to create contingency plans against their own children. Yet there it was, black ink, real paper, real intentions. I slowly began reading. The first section listed possible medical schools, not just names, notes. Too far away, would encourage independence, high likelihood of relocation, need family involvement if accepted. My breathing became shallow. Every school I dreamed about, every possibility I'd worked toward, reduced to bullet points in a strategy designed to keep me under their control. Further down the page, another heading appeared, communication strategy. Underneath it were handwritten notes, monitor application timeline, encourage local opportunities, use extended family if necessary, emphasize financial realities, Delay major decisions. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't impulsive. It was planned, calculated, years in advance. My hands started shaking. I looked up at Ava. How long have they been doing this? She swallowed. I don't know. You have to know something. She nodded slowly. I found that notebook after Dad forgot to lock his office. When? A few weeks after you left. Why didn't you tell me? She looked down at the table. I was scared. I kept telling myself they didn't really mean it. But then she took a deep breath. They started asking me questions about your professors. That answer said everything. This wasn't over. It had never been over. That evening, I drove straight to Uncle Ryan's house. Within an hour, both sets of grandparents were sitting around the dining room table again. I laid everything in front of them. The screenshots, the messages, the handwritten notes. No one interrupted. No one spoke. Grandpa Thomas adjusted his glasses and slowly turned each page. When he finished, he closed the folder, very gently, then removed his glasses. In all my life, I'd never seen him look that heartbroken. They planned this. Nobody answered, because nobody needed to. The evidence spoke for itself. The following morning, Grandpa Thomas called the family's attorney. Not to sue. Not yet. To protect me. Within days, a formal cease and desist letter was sent demanding that my parents stop attempting to obtain information about me through relatives, social media, or any third parties. Copies were sent to multiple family members. Everyone now understood exactly why they were being asked not to share updates about my life. The message was simple. If anyone passed information along, they would be helping my parents continue years of manipulation. After that, the phone calls stopped, almost overnight. But something else happened, something none of us expected. Ava moved out. One Friday afternoon, she packed 2 suitcases. Grandpa Thomas drove to my parents' house. She walked out carrying only a backpack and a small box of personal belongings. Mom cried. Dad argued. Neighbors watched from across the street. Ava never looked back. She moved in with Grandma Evelyn and Grandpa Thomas that same evening. For the first time in years, she had privacy. No password demands, no inspections, no constant comparisons, just peace. It wasn't an instant transformation. Healing never is. The first few weeks were difficult. Ava apologized constantly, sometimes 3 or 4 times in the same conversation. Eventually, Grandpa Thomas stopped her. He gently said, "Real change isn't measured by apologies. It's measured by what you do next." She never forgot those words. She transferred to another high school, started seeing a counselor, deleted nearly every social media account she'd once obsessed over. Little by little, she began building an identity that didn't revolve around pleasing our parents. For the first time, she started making decisions because they mattered to her, not because someone expected them. Watching that change from a distance was strange. Part of me still hurt. Part of me still remembered every betrayal. But another part recognized something important. The sister sitting in front of me now wasn't the same girl who had helped spy on me. She was finally becoming her own person. Trust wouldn't return overnight. Maybe it never fully would. But healing had finally begun. As for me, college became everything I'd hoped it would be. Classes were challenging. Research consumed most of my evenings. My professors pushed me harder than any teacher ever had. I loved every minute of it. Nobody asked me to become smaller. Nobody apologized for my success. People celebrated it. That alone felt almost unbelievable. By the end of freshman year, I'd earned a 3.9 GPA, joined a bacterial resistance research team, presented my first research poster, and secured a competitive summer laboratory position. Every achievement reminded me of one simple truth. Success grows where encouragement exists. A few months later, campus security contacted me. Someone had tried to enter my residence hall asking for me. I already knew who it was. My parents. Security refused them entry. When they refused to leave, campus police escorted them off university property. After reviewing everything that had happened, the university permanently flagged my student record. No information would ever be released to them. Not schedules, not housing, not grades, nothing. For the first time, I felt completely safe. Months turned into a year, then another. News about my parents occasionally reached me through relatives. Dad had taken a second job. Mom started tutoring after school. Without the inheritance they'd once expected, their financial plans had collapsed. Some relatives still spoke to them. Most didn't. Not because anyone had forced a choice, because trust, once broken that deeply, rarely repairs itself. They continued insisting they'd acted for the family. The problem was, nobody believed them anymore. One afternoon during my sophomore year, Ava called. "I got accepted?" I smiled. "Where?" She laughed through happy tears. "State University? What are you studying?" There was a brief pause. "Psychology." I wasn't surprised. She wanted to understand manipulation, control, family dynamics. Maybe she also wanted to understand herself. "I'm proud of you," I told her. The silence that followed was different from the silences we'd shared growing up. This one wasn't filled with resentment. It was filled with relief. People still ask whether I ever forgave my parents. The answer is complicated. I let go of the anger. Eventually. Holding on to it forever would have only hurt me. But forgiveness isn't the same as trust. And trust has to be earned. They never truly accepted responsibility. They apologized for the consequences, not for the choices. Even years later, they still describe themselves as victims. Until someone can honestly admit what they've done, real reconciliation isn't possible. Looking back now, I no longer think losing Johns Hopkins was the greatest tragedy of my story. The real tragedy was discovering that the people who should have believed in me believed I needed to be held back. Because if they'd succeeded once, they would have done it again. Medical school, residency, career opportunities, relationships. There would have always been another reason, another excuse, another sacrifice. Always mine, never theirs. In a strange way, discovering the truth saved my future. It forced me to build boundaries before my career truly began. It taught me that love without respect isn't love at all. It's control. Today, I still speak regularly with my grandparents. Uncle Ryan and Aunt Lauren remain two of the most important people in my life. Ava and I continue rebuilding our relationship one honest conversation at a time, slowly, carefully, without pretending the past never happened. As for my parents, I genuinely hope they find peace someday. But that journey has to begin with accountability. And that's a road only they can choose to walk. If this experience taught me anything, it's that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by the people who celebrate your victories instead of fearing them. The people who protect your dreams instead of shrinking them. The people who stand beside you when the truth is uncomfortable. Because real love never asks you to become less, so someone else can feel like more. And if someone truly loves you, they'll never sabotage your future just to preserve their version of the present. That chapter of my life is over. The future my parents tried so hard to steal became the future I built anyway. Only this time, it belonged entirely to me.